Welcome in, Warchant TV. Great to be with you as we continue to break down Florida State's ongoing efforts to transform from 2-10 to hopefully 12-0. We'll see. But we're learning about staff. We're learning about recruits. We're learning about it all hourly. So you're going to want to lock in right now. And certainly if you're not a member of warchant.com, get with the program, everybody. Breaking news here today. You see Gene Williams. You see Ira Schafel on the screen. That must mean we brought in the heavy hitters as Tony White is going to be named, expected to be named the defensive coordinator for Florida State. He'll come over from Nebraska. He's 45 years old, been 2 years at Nebraska, where really by any analytics, guys, Nebraska's had a top 20 defense, and this is an interesting hire and a good one, in my opinion. I'll throw that out there at the jump street here. Young, a guy that's thought of as a future head coach. He's even interviewed for some head coaching jobs, leaving Nebraska and Matt Rule's staff to come to Florida State and coach here in Tallahassee. Gene, start with you. Your thoughts on the news today. I know we were both trying to break that story and figure out if we can get confirmation. But Tony White is a name that was mentioned, but I think he was a little lower down the ladder initially when we heard some of these names. But it looks like he's the guy for Florida State.
Yeah, he was one of the guys. We had him on original hot board, but he was down in the second tier, and I think he just created more and more buzz. I almost wonder it's one of those things where they didn't know if they could really get him. Obviously, Nebraska's a huge program. He's paid well. I think he gets about $1.6 million there as his salary. So why would he go anywhere? But it obviously it trended way up the last few days. And I absolutely love the hire. And the biggest criticism you heard, guys, going into this was Mike Norvell is going to rely on more of these group of five guys that are unproven, not with the two coordinator hires. These are big names. They are guys that are proven it at the highest level. And what I love about Tony White, guys, is the consistency. Anybody can have a good season here or there. Going back to his last 2 years, remember, he was a defensive coordinator at Syracuse, so Mike Norvell is very familiar with him. So he's played against him. He has a firsthand knowledge. The last 2 seasons at Nebraska, top 20 defenses. He's done it at different programs, different personnel. So I love that consistency coming in, because what we wouldn't give for a top 20 defense at Florida State next year. I know the bigger problem is probably the other side of the ball, but still, that would do a lot. And I think he brings a little bit more to the table recruiting-wise. I know he's not got big Florida connections right now, but I know we're going to talk about it. You're going to have some more, Jeff, on your follow-up with some of the connections and some of the other people he might bring with him that I think are really going to give FSU a bump on the recruiting department.
Ira, the dominoes are beginning to fall. I want your perspective. In a very quick amount of time, or a short period of time, I should say, we now have a name offensive coordinator. Everybody knows who Gus Malzahn is. Tony White's an up-and-comer in this business, a guy that a lot of people think, as I mentioned before, will be a head coach at some point. Young, aggressive, 45 years old, as I said. Top 20 defense is really everywhere he's ever been. So it's happening. Mike Norvell said after the game and said in previous interviews that you've done with him that, hey, it's going to be quick. It's going to be instant. We're going to get this thing turned around. Your thoughts on the news today about Tony White's hiring?
Yeah, I think the combination of the two hirings really speaks to how serious Florida State is and how committed they are. A lot of people wondered if Mike Norvell's job might be in jeopardy this year. There's a lot of reasons why. There's 63 million reasons we know for sure that they didn't want to make that change. But also, I think there was a belief, talking to people inside the administration, that they believe Mike Norvell could do it if he had a better staff around him. Well, man, they have done what they could do to surround him with a great staff. Gus Malzahn is a guy who won a national championship as an offensive coordinator, took his team as head coach at Auburn to the national championship game where they lost to the Noles. And then Tony White is a guy who, as Gene said and you said, has proven at different schools, and again, not necessarily with the best personnel. I'm impressed that you could do that at Nebraska, because Nebraska, the story has been written so many times over the last 20 years that Nebraska will never get back to being Nebraska because they can't recruit the level of players they need to anymore. Now that the rest of the country is on television, it's not Nebraska, Florida State, Notre Dame as the powers. Well, man, I have to believe he can get better players in Tallahassee than he got at Nebraska and Syracuse. And as Gene said, consistently had top 20 defenses. And he does have some connections to the state of Florida. And I'm just excited to see what this defense looks like with some new blood. I thought we saw signs after Adam Fuller was dismissed, these last couple of games with Randy Shannon running this show. I thought they played a little bit harder these last couple of games. I think things had gotten stale with Coach Fuller. And I'm really excited to see what Tony White can do for this defense.
You talk about the impressive numbers, Gene. I know you have them before you, but for anybody just jumping on this video right now to learn about Tony White, hey, Ohio State, who I know just laid an egg against Michigan, it's why we love rivalry games, right? But Ohio State converted 1 third down against Nebraska, and that backfield in which they have 2 NFL running backs had one of their worst days all season against Nebraska's defense. Shedeur Sanders, Hunter, all of the firepower at Colorado shut down by this Nebraska defense.
10 points.
Dominated Colorado, dominated the offensive line, dominated the run game. He was on his back the whole game. If you go back and look at some of the other numbers, whether it was Minnesota or anybody else, they forced Fleck to throw the ball in a way that he's never wanted to throw the ball because they simply could not run against Nebraska. You go through game by game, there's a stinker in there or two. You'll see that. It happens. It's football. The other team's on scholarship as well. But the point is, for the most part, advanced analytics, your traditional stats have Nebraska as a top 15, top 16 defense year in and year out, the 2 years he was there. But also prior to that, very good at Syracuse, very good at Arizona State. He's done a lot of good work everywhere he's ever been, and he's pretty young.
And I also think I want to get your guys' opinion on this, speaking to the brand. I think, weren't we worried going into this that Mike Norvell, there's a lot of buzz that this might be his last year if he fails again. He might be hard to attract the right kind of coordinator. The fact that he got these 2 guys are not coming to Florida State to just be here for a year and get fired and go off. They're expecting to build something here at Florida State. So, I mean, it says a lot to the iconic brand that Florida State is, that they are still able to attract top 5 coordinators. I'm curious, was that a concern with you guys that he might have a hard time getting the Tony Whites, getting a Gus Malzahn in here, just because there's a lot of question marks going into his tenure at Florida State going into 2025?
Well, and Ira, I'll ask you, we've said before on Seminole Headlines, you've written about it, I've talked about it on the Jeff Cameron Show, we all know that Florida State has never been cheap when it comes to their assistant coaches. But if you want further proof of that, to Gene's point, you know they're having to probably pay north of $2 million a year for this coordinator now, because he was making 1.6, 1.9, depending on where you look, right? He was an associate head coach. He's not coming for less, I wouldn't think. And, Gus Malzahn's not coming on the cheap. So Florida State recognizes the depth of the problem and the need to spare no expenses at this point and bringing in some name coordinators and going all in with these assistants.
Yeah, and the other way to look at it, Gene, and Jeff and I have talked about this some on the headlines as well, is, man, these coaches, whoever came in here to Florida State right now, was going to have a great opportunity to really show some impressive turnaround, because you can't play worse than Florida State did this year. I need really offensively, it might be the worst offense in the FBS. So Gus Malzahn, man, if you just get them into the 50s or the 40s, that would be like, oh, this is the messiah of offensive football. And Tony White's going to have the same opportunity. This defense was not as bad as they played. They're close to around 100 nationally in total defense. They just kind of cratered as the season went on. There is some talent on this team, and I really think the other way this is going to help, I think it's going to help in recruiting. You guys touched on at the beginning. I think it really might help in some of the players that you want to keep.
Yeah, and for those wondering, just to get to the specifics here about what Tony White runs, you'll hear a lot about the 3-3-5, and that's fine, but he's multiple. They've had plenty of 4-man fronts as well. One of the things I like about him, guys, he's a little bit old school. I remember the jargon being very similar where they had rovers. Well, he has a rover. He has a jack linebacker. I remember jack linebackers. He's got all those things. So they can be very multiple depending on the person. It's not just the 3-3-5. He has changed it up quite a bit in his career. So it'll be interesting to see what he employs here and who's he bringing with him. There's a possibility he's bringing either more players or perhaps coaches. So we're going to have to continue to monitor this, guys, as the news breaks. We'll be on top of it all day long. Really, this week is going to be sensational on Warchant, on all the shows. Wake Up Warchant, the Jeff Cameron Show. Obviously, Mike will be very busy breaking news with recruiting. We've got you covered. Ira is constantly going to be on top of it as well. We'll break in with new videos as they happen. But the news today is big news. Tony White, Nebraska defensive coordinator and associate head coach, looks to be moving to Florida State, greener pastures, if you will. Hopefully for Florida State, that is the case. We'll have more for you right here on Warchant TV, warchant.com. And as I mentioned before, all the shows. He's Gene Williams. That's Ira Schafel. I'm Jeff Cameron. Thanks so much for watching. Stay with Warchant all day.